ताकि हम लोग क्लास को शुरू करें। और जैसा कि आप सब लोगों को मालूम है कि आज का क्लास लेने के लिए हमारे बीच प्रोफेसर थोराट आए हुए हैं और आज का टॉपिक है फ्रीडम एंड अम्बेडकर। तो मैं सबसे पहले चाहता हूं कि प्रोफेसर सुरेंद्र सर आएँ और थोराट सर का वेलकम करें। साथ ही साथ हमारे बीच इस क्लास के बाद एक और स्पीकर आए हुए हैं देवेश आनंद, वो अपनी बात रखेंगे। तो आप सब लोगों से अनुरोध है कि इस पूरे क्लास में, इस पूरे लेक्चर में मौजूद रहें। तो मैं बुलाना चाहता हूं सर को कि वो आएँ और इंट्रोड्यूस करें, हालांकि उनको इंट्रोडक्शन की ज़रूरत नहीं है।
Lesser number of people would know me here than they would know. I mean, Professor Thorat is kind of everybody's Professor Thorat, so he doesn't need any introduction. But I think there's still a point in talking about Professor Thorat in a specific way, and I think that is something which perhaps some of the younger generation need to know. As we all know, he has been a professor here. He is still a professor emeritus in CSRD. He studied in JNU and then he became a faculty here, eventually became professor. And JNU obviously has reasons to be proud of Professor Thorat because he is perhaps the only professor from JNU who became chairperson of University Grants Commission. And currently also he is chairperson of Indian Council of Social Science Research. And obviously he's taught for many years, he's published many books, etc., etc. All that academic CV is not really very significant. But that's only one aspect of Professor Thorat's personality and why we know him as Professor Thorat today. I think this movement the other day, you keep talking about Occupy UGC. I think that's something which you must, in a sense, connect with Professor Thorat. I remember when I was doing PhD, there were very few scholarships, fellowships available. We had to write that exam, and for every subject there would be 20 or 30 or 40 fellowships. And if you qualify, only then you would get money. No one else got money. It was during Professor Thorat's tenure as UGC chairperson, and I know how he worked on it. It was not easy that everyone should get some money. First, he worked very hard to increase the number of fellowships that were available through writing the exam. And that itself qualified many more people to get money, which our students started getting during his tenure. And the number went up by, I think, 10 or 20 folds. It was not insignificant increase. And then this came where every student should get some money. Central universities were directly under UGC. He couldn't have done for every university. He lobbied for it with the government of India. It was not very easy, right? He lobbied with government of India, convinced them how relevant it is. There was this agenda of increasing enrollment in higher education, and he worked with the Prime Minister directly, he worked with the Education Minister, and then convinced them that how you require these people to complete their PhD. Unless you give them money, at least subsistence money, they would not complete PhD. Unless they do PhDs, you would not have personnel to become faculty member in different universities that are opening up the colleges. You would require all these. He made those cases, and I know he works on every kind of subject with data and tables, his training in economics, and then he goes and presents this case. And that's how he raised money for this scholarships, which every MPhil PhD student started getting in JNU and some other central universities. It's not given everywhere. It was not given earlier. And this was something which was started only because, exclusively because of the efforts of Professor Thorat. And I think that is what I wanted to tell you, that this is something which is very, very important contribution which Professor Thorat has done. I hope these fellowships will continue forever now. And the third, very, very important, which again, perhaps, since I have worked with Professor Thorat, I was also associated with the institute he set up in the Institute of Dalit Studies, and some of you would perhaps not know the history of caste in the manner in which he, in a sense, initiated a turn in the manner in which we understand caste today. Caste has been around. We have been talking about caste. Anthropologists have been studying caste forever. Colonial ethnographers wrote about caste, untouchability, hierarchy, etc., etc. And then obviously we have Ambedkar, about whom we are going to discuss, and many other reformers and Dalit activists talked about caste. But there was something very, very distinctive turn to the understanding of caste, which has been given primarily by Professor Thorat and his initiatives and his leadership. And that was to translate caste into the language of policy. If you look at the Planning Commission documents of India, first 5-year plan, second 5, though we have reservations, there is no discussion of caste in the policy discourse. When we talk about poverty, poverty was always measured as an attribute of a household. You're poor or rich has no aspect of identity. And I know how last 10-15 years Mr. Thorat picked up literature from different parts of the world and started talking about group variables and how do we bring them on identities as being significant in understanding of poverty. And this then became mainstream. I mean, picking up Amartya Sen's article on social exclusion, for example, which was again talking about social exclusion in a very particular manner. And this article was published, I think, done for Asian Development Bank. And I know how he picked up that idea from there, then picked up theories of discrimination from race studies in America and argued for an application-oriented understanding of caste. And then caste began to be included in the Planning Commission documents as chapters. It began to be accepted as a variable in the literature on development. And this has made a fundamental change in the manner in which we think about poverty, in the manner in which we think about inequality and underdevelopment and development. All the mainstream literature that we have been talking about, nobody ever talked about caste in this kind of language. Now UNDP began to recognize caste as a variable in development, and all kinds of global funding became available for talking about caste. I mean, Durban, everybody talks about, but behind Durban and after Durban, a lot of work had to be done to institutionalize caste in the state system so that you can make claims over state resources through various kinds of demands. And this is where Professor Thorat's role, I don't think anyone has, many others have also worked with him and many others have developed that kind of, literature. This volume that came out, Blocked by Caste, it was a lot of efforts. It was not something which just came out. And talking about caste as something which is very, very mainstream, something which state has to deal with, something which has to be accepted as a reality for development. We can't wait for revolution. We have to ask this state to deliver. We have to ask this state to keep aside money for scheduled castes, for scheduled tribes, for OBCs also. Then he also, in UGC for example, all these new fellowships that came up for minority students, all those things were also during Professor Thorat's kind of tenure. So this whole idea of community variable becoming a relevant category in development discourse, credit in a large sense goes to Professor Thorat. So Professor Thorat is not simply a professor of economics in JNU or, and now that's what he has done in ICSSR. I've seen it in last 3-4 years. I've worked with him in ICSSR, how the funding of ICSSR went up by something like 30-fold. And the money that we have available now, anybody applies for any grant, it's available. Anyone applies for fellowship for some time, everyone got a fellowship, whosoever was eligible technically. And this was because money became available. Earlier there would be 20 fellowships for PhD, now there are 200 or 200 plus. And so the kind of work that he has done to build social sciences in India is actually very, very important, and that's something which we need to kind of celebrate along with Professor Thorat's lecture on Ambedkar and freedom.
Thank you, Professor Jotka. It's a very lengthy introduction about me. Only day before I got a phone call, I was not in Delhi, from Kunal, asking me to speak on Ambedkar and freedom. Earlier there was a request to speak on higher education. I am a student of, I have studied some aspect of Dr. Ambedkar, not all of them. Most of the writing of Dr. Ambedkar is in the area of political science, law, constitutions, anthropology, sociology. Although he had a PhD and DSc from Columbia and London School of Economics, but he, I think after 25, after completing his PhD and DSc, he never returned back to economics. Hardly anything, because economics didn't help him much to understand the problems of the lower caste and untouchable. So I always have a difficulty in absorbing him. But whatever I have understood of him, I'd like to share with you on the issue of Dr. Ambedkar on freedom. I think it is very important. How much time I have? Let me begin with one fact that we have to situate Ambedkar in the context in which he emerged in the city of Bombay and later on in Maharashtra and later at the national level. Dr. Ambedkar went to Columbia University in 1913, finished his PhD, went back to London, did his DSc and did his Bharat Law, and came back, I think, around 1918. And his active political life began, or social life began, with the first memorandum that he submitted to the South Bureau Committee. You may be aware that India was governed at that time what is called Government of India Act, and that act was used to come for a revision every 10 years. And the Indian delegates, various sections in Indian society would go and ask for reform in Indian Government of India Act. And for the first time, Dr. Ambedkar emerged on the scene, and he submitted a memorandum to South Bureau Committee, asking for several demands, particularly for the former untouchable. He didn't get much in 1990, but he repeated in 1930, 10 years after Simon Commission came. He submitted another memorandum, and then there were a series of roundtable conferences, 3 roundtable conferences in London. He submitted a memorandum there. He was invited, and that led to the enactment of 1935 Act, the sort of an Indian constitution, and he got a reservation policy in politics in 1932, and then later on in 1940 he was a minister at that time. And the last statement that we get is the statement that he submitted to the Constitutional Assembly as a program for the safeguard for the minorities. But state and minority was also in the form of constitution. He had almost produced a draft constitution, and in that what are the rights and privileges, what are the safeguard the government should introduce in the constitutions. So Ambedkar emerged on a scene in 1990, but it's a typical situation. Let me take 5 minutes to explain you. 1920, when he began his work, 1920 to 1950 is such a crucial period in history that it almost shaped the character of India, what we have today. If you look at 1920, freedom movement started. We got independent in 1947. There was a reorganization of the state. The issue of minority, what it speaks, which resulted in partition of India. This is also a period when the framework for economic and social planning was laid down. We accepted 5-year plan as an instrument for economic development. And these were therefore very important initiatives, decisions that really shaped the character of India. And it is precisely at this time Dr. Ambedkar emerged on the scene. I want to say only one thing, that on each of the issues that emerged during 1920 and 1950, Ambedkar contributed. Sometime when he was in power on the committee, but most of the time he wrote on the issues. For example, just to give 1 or 2 examples, when the question of minority came, he wrote a book, Thoughts on Pakistan, which was sold within a year, and then the second copy came as a Pakistan and Partition of India. When the reorganization report came, and they recommended 1 language, 1 state, Ambedkar was the only person who wrote a severe critique of reorganization of the state and gave an alternative scheme, which my institute has brought out. Sudha Pai and Mishra brought out the entire collection of his views. And whatever reorganization of the state has taken place after that, it's all based on the Ambedkar's scheme of reorganization. In the constitution making, of course, he was involved right from the beginning in 1920 till 1950, and of course in 1947 he was made a member of the Constitution Assembly, and then the member of the drafting committee, and finally the chairman. But he contributed right from the beginning. His contribution was known to everybody in the roundtable conference. Probably that was one of the reasons why he was made the chairman. Now, what I am trying to say is that the 1920 to 1950 being a very important period, and several things happened which shaped the characters of India, what we have today. Ambedkar contributed on each of these. There is another point that I would like to mention before I go to the his views. Is that 1920, early 20 is also a period which is characterized by emergence of various organizations. If I want to read out quickly, for example, the Congress was formed in 1885, 70. Yes, Congress was formed in 1885. You have Communist Party of India established in 1925. You have Congress Socialist Party in 1934. You have RSS in 1925. You have Hindu Mahasabha in 1915. And you have various thoughts and various leaders preceding this particular period. If you can begin with some of the important people, you have Ramon Rai, who influenced early concept of Hindu nationalism. You have Dayananda Saraswati, followed by Vivekananda. Then you have Aurobindo Ghosh. You have Tilak. These all people contributed quite a lot in development of a particular concept of nationalism. Now it is in this atmosphere that Dr. Ambedkar emerged on the scene. And along with these people, along with this organization, there are certain isms which appeared. They had a perspective of their own as to what should be the character of India, what should be the approach towards the freedom of India. So you have Gandhism coming in a full form. You have communism coming in a full form in 1925, and major leadership Randiv and Dange interacted with Ambedkar. Then you have democratic socialists very active at that point of time. And you have, of course, Hindu nationalism thoughts are appeared very strongly. This were the culmination of the contribution by all these people that I have mentioned, but it took an institutional form in the form of Hindu Mahasabha, which was set up in 1950 by Madan Mohan Malviya, and then RSS in 1925. And here is Ambedkar, which comes on the scene with the problem of untouchable. He interacted with Gandhism, with all of us we know. He interacted with Marxist. He interacted with Madan Mohan Malviya. He interacted, of course, very closely at a later stage with the democratic socialist, Lohiya. But after having interacted with each one of them, he was not as satisfied as he wanted to be, and therefore he draws something from each one of them, but he felt that he has to search out his own way, and therefore Ambedkar searched out his own way. And this is what I would like to share with you, that he has to find out his own way, and he has to interpret the problem of the untouchable, particularly in the problem of Hindu social order, which in his view was the reason for the degradation of the untouchable. Now let me come to his contribution and the problem that he faced. In the 1920s and the 30s, Dr. Ambedkar was faced with two problems. One, there was a severe and serious freedom movement to make the India free from the colonial capture. So he has to express his view on the political freedom. And second, after having got the political freedom, for example, what should be the nature of Indian state, India as a nation? And there were different viewpoints. You had RSS and you had Hindu Mahasabha and Madan Mohan Malviya talking in terms of Hindu nationalism, and you have many others talking about differently. Congress talking about differently, democratic socialist parties viewing it differently, and even communist viewing differently. And it is here that Ambedkar has to take a position, keeping the interest of the untouchable and reform of the Hindu social order. Now, what Ambedkar did obviously was he differed, and then let us understand very quickly. He differed with the Congress, with those who argued for a political freedom and independence of India. He was for it, in the Roundtable Conference in 1932, he made a statement very clearly that the future of the Dalit and future of the untouchable will be safe only in Swaraj, and that there has not been much change in the situation of the former untouchable after Britishers came. They were there where they were, and therefore their fate will be a lot more better if there is a Swaraj, if there is a independence. So there was no disagreement on that point. The only point that he disagreed, and that is the point which continues today, is that what he was arguing, that we will be free from the British colonialism, British dominations, we'll get the political independence. But he was very scared and he was very worried that after having transferred the power to the majority Hindu, which constitute almost 80% of the population, what will be the fate of the untouchable in the independent India? He was worried simply because that there was a line of thinking which came from, as I said with you, which began with Ramon Roy and end with Tilak, and even it went to a certain extent to Gandhiji, which quite independent of the cultural aspect of the nationalism, many of them were not clear about the social institution of caste. Quite a few of them, many of them supported it. Gandhiji, as late as 1925, believed in caste system. Just provide justification for the caste system. It is only in 1925 he switched out from caste system to Varna system. If you want to study really what is Gandhiji's views on the caste system and other, please go through Ambedkar's book, What Congress and Gandhi Have Done to Untouchable, and there is a chapter on Gandhism. Because often I feel that there are some academicians who write about Gandhiji, and they at times lead to be little dishonest because they are scared how they should write on such an orthodox view of Gandhiji. On some matters, of course. So now, since Dr. Ambedkar was very worried that after having got the freedom, and these being the views of the majority leaders of a particular ideology, there is no guarantee that the fate of the Dalit will be better after the independence. Therefore, he wanted guarantee. That's the only difference. He said that I am for freedom, but gives guarantee to Dalit in the form of legal safeguard and other safeguard against discrimination. And therefore, he, from 1919 onward till 1932, when he got the reservation in politics, his argument was he only worked for providing that policy for the former untouchable. That policy has a couple of elements that the Dalits should have equal civic right, they should be as citizens as others are, there should be legal protection against the discrimination, that is law, and there should be a reservation policy whereby they will get then a proportionate share in employment and in legislature and education. And he also wanted some safeguard against the administration. So that is the only thing that he was arguing, that before independence happens, we should have a guarantee so that we get the similar right as the other would enjoy. That is the only difference. And some of those who could not understand what he was trying to say, Gandhiji understood him. When he met Gandhiji for the first time, in that famous meeting, he said, Gandhiji, I don't have a homeland. And then Gandhiji said, no, you have a homeland, and I know what you said in the Roundtable Conference, how you defended the program of political freedom, and you are a patriot of stellar quality. These are the words of Gandhiji. But so there was no problem there. Gandhiji understood him much better than anybody else. But there are some, for example, Shauri's book, it's a very inferior quality of scholarship, if you ask me. It required a level and compassion and proper approach to understand what Ambedkar was saying. I mean, treating Ambedkar as an anti-freedom movement, treating Ambedkar as a pro-British. These are reflection of a very limited understanding of the scholarship. If that was the case, I think Ambedkar was the worst critic of Gandhiji. You have to read Annihilation of Caste, you have to read some other book and what kind of criticism that he had made. And yet, it was Gandhiji, we are told, who suggested the name of Ambedkar to be the chairman of the drafting committee. but others don't understand the issues. Now, I think this is, so Ambedkar was confronted with the issue of taking a position vis-a-vis the political freedom. Second issue, of course, that after having got the political freedom and certain guarantees to the former untouchable in the form of legal safeguard, in the form of reservation policy, share in the legislature, in employment and all that, what should be the character of India as a nation? And there was a clear demarcation there. Some of those who wanted to make Indian nationalism associated with certain religious characteristics, that was the line of argument. But Ambedkar was very clear. Ambedkar nationalism was based on egalitarianism and the democracy. I don't have a time to describe it in greater detail. He has his own definition of nationalism. But the broad principle were that the territory matters, but the language, ethnicity and colors and race doesn't matter. What you require is the principle of that each one of them who are in the territory should be treated equally. Each one of them should have a socially inclusive life. Each one of them should have a communication and participation and a sense of brotherhood and the fraternity. He emphasized fraternity quite a lot for any nationalism to be successful. So the basic principle of nationalism were democracy and egalitarianism and fraternity, equality and liberty. That is how he differed with others, those who do not agree with him. Now, so you can see that he has taken a clear position on both political freedom as well as the nature of the nation, the character of the nation that should be there. Now, after having taken this position and argued and fight it out, then the major views of Ambedkar, major position of Ambedkar, which we need to study, and I'll come to that because you expect me to speak on Ambedkar freedom, is that he began to analyze the social organization of Hindus, namely the caste system. And because he began to feel that the roots of the non-freedom, inequality, oppression, exclusion of Dalits are located in the Hindu social organization, namely the caste system. And therefore he began to analyze, and there he came in contradiction with many of the academicians. But he was very clear from the very beginning. He himself experienced discrimination when he was in the school in Satara. He used to sit outside, far away from the student. He wouldn't get a water from the same tap, so the water will be poured from the distance. When he was asked to solve the problem on the board, and he went nearby the tiffin of the high caste, so all of them they ran to the tiffin and pick up their tiffin. Nobody will cut his hair, so his sister used to do that job. When he became, after PhD and DSc from London School of Economics, he went to Sydenham College. There was a separate drinking arrangement. Such a highly qualified person. You have to read the book by Krishnamurti. Dr. Ambedkar was the first PhD from outside in economics because he got it in 1960. So he faced discrimination in the college, and then when he came back immediately, one of his very close Parsi friend who shared a room in Columbia University, he gave him some job, consultancy in Botley Boy accountancy. You may be knowing it was famous, and people won't come to him because of his background. He started working in the court. He won't get the cases. So the caste experience was his personal. And as a result of which he began to study the problem. In fact, the first essay he wrote, he took economics as a major, but the anthropology and sociology were the subsidiary subject, and he was required to write an essay, a seminar, and he wrote the theory of caste, which he published in Indian Antiquity. So and it's a marvelous and powerful write-up. I mean, one get wonderstruck that he was hardly 22 at that time, but if you look at the level of the write-up and the theoretical exposition, it's amazingly of a different order. They are in the rights, social, religious, economic and political. But it assigns those rights, it gives the entitlement of right to each of these 5 castes in a graded and unequal manner. So that some have more and some have less. And he is the one who used the word graded inequality. And the graded inequality, this character of the caste system is the problem for us. After having given reservation to scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, caste after caste are asking for a reservation, and we don't understand why they are asking. The roots lies in the graded inequality of the caste system. Now the graded inequality essentially, according to Dr. Ambedkar, a parallel word have been used now, hierarchical inequality. Domo's whole theory is based on that characteristics of one characteristics of caste. But graded inequality essentially means that the allocation of rights and duties is not only unequal across the caste, but as you go down in the caste from top to the bottom, the rights goes down. But as you go up, the right goes up. But as you go down, the right goes down, but the duties and the privilege duties increases. So it is this graded inequality which takes you away, takes rights from you. That is the major characteristics of the caste system. And by the time you start from Brahmin and come down to the untouchable at the bottom of the caste hierarchy have practically nothing. No right to property, no right to land and private enterprises, no right to education, no religious right, no civil rights. The only right is to serve the high caste. I am quoting literally from the Manusmriti. So the whole burden of this graded inequality falls on the shoulder of the untouchable, and that is primarily because of the denial of most of the right to them. Not only denying the right to them, because there is a differential denial for different castes also, but for untouchable everything is denied. But they are also, over and above, they are considered to be polluting and impure caste. And that is why they are not to be touched, they are not to be seen, they are not to be approached. Unseeability, untouchability and unapproachability, which was put into practice during Peshwa. Therefore, in every village, they are socially and physically segregated even today. So you can see the status of untouchable that Dr. Ambedkar has brought out in this characteristic. But 2 more characteristics which are not emphasized as much as they should be emphasized, which are, Ambedkar writes in a very, very detailed manner. And that we see even in today, which comes in such a live form. The third characteristic is that beside being based on principle of graded inequality, the caste also involved, it prescribed a mechanism for its enforcement. It prescribed a community level mechanism for its enforcement. You don't require police. The community itself enforce and maintain the caste system. Any deviation from the caste course is subject to the punishment of penalties. Excommunication, social and economic penalties. Therefore, these particular features has maintained the caste system for such a long period of time. 2 boys in Rajasthan, they commit the theft. Instead of registering a case with the police, the community take the role of maintaining. If in Haryana, boys and girls coming from different castes, they dare to violate the court, the punishment is by the parent. Forget about the community. And the punishment at times is capital punishment. These are the remnants of the caste system which even we see today. In Tamil Nadu, a boy and a girl married, is caught on the road and killed. You can see the passion and the impact of the caste code even today present as and when there is a violation of the caste code. Now this is very important feature which maintain the caste system, and because the price for violation of the customary code is very high, and not only for the untouchable, it's for the high caste also. Excommunication of your own people. Iravati Karve went to Germany and did her PhD in anthropology. When she came back, she was excommunicated by the Brahmin, Pune Brahmin, simply because she caused 7 oceans. Vivekananda went to USA and gave a marvelous lecture and came back. And the High Court of the Bengal High Court refused to preside over the function, felicitation function, because he has crossed 7 oceans. So it was not, excommunication is not only for untouchable. For them, of course, it's a severe punishment, but the high caste also are punished. Now that is the 4th characteristic which we have to remember. And the 5th, and very important, where Gandhiji would not agree and many would not agree with Ambedkar, is that the caste system has a religious foundation. The philosophical foundation that comes from the Hindu religion. the ethics and morality, which comes from as a support to the caste system. It's quite obvious, the caste system is of a divine origin. It's created by God. We need not tell them. You have to read Gita, you have to read Ramayana and Mahabharata, and of course Manusmriti. It's of a divine origin. So the religious morality and ethics give and support to the caste system. Besides, of course, the legal support, because Manusmriti was a legal code. So legally, morally and ethically, the Hindu religious philosophy extends the support. And that is why this double injection, legal as well as moral, bring a complete solidarity to the caste system of any assault that would be there from outside. So therefore Ambedkar compares slavery and untouchability. Why is it that the slavery has disappeared immediately after passing of Anti-Slavery Act? Within 10-15 years it disappeared. Caste, racial discrimination is there. The Anti-Untouchability Act was passed in 1955, and several acts were passed before independence in the state, and yet the untouchability is rampant. The reason is, Dr. Ambedkar's view is, that it is the religious support to the caste system which bring the solidarity. Now, with this interpretation, you can see then that the Ambedkar's later movement, his concept of the solution that he has given is then influenced by his interpretation of the caste system, and there are differences, of course. You have to read the differences of Gandhiji. Gandhiji would argue that untouchability and caste system are appendix to the Hindu religion. They are not a part of Hindu religion. And Gandhiji had said, Ambedkar, don't worry, the untouchability will disappear in 10 years. How the vision of Gandhiji was limited with respect to caste system, one can see that how untouchability in caste system still persists. But let me come to now the important point, that how caste system, the way Dr. Ambedkar has described, undermined the freedom, undermined many other fundamental rights that everybody should enjoy. Now, the way Dr. Ambedkar has described the caste system, Hindu social organization is based on the principle of inequality, injustice, anti-social spirit, and exclusion. This is the conclusion of Dr. Ambedkar. If you read Annihilation of Caste, how to annihilate the caste, while prescribing the solution, he captured these 3-4 important features of the caste system, that it is based on the institution of graded inequality, exclusion, anti-social spirit, and isolation and exclusion is one of the important features that he has underlined. Discrimination is faced by every caste other than Brahmin. Even Kshatriya face discrimination in the sense that they don't have a right to perform religious duties. Or Vaishya face discrimination because Vaishya cannot have military as an occupation, or they cannot be a priest. Classical position, textual position. But in case of untouchable, not only discrimination is very severe, but they are also isolated and excluded. So exclusion and isolation is a very typical characteristics of the caste system, particularly affecting the untouchable. Now, since this institution is based on principle of inequality and the principle of restrictions, do's and don't is the foundation of the caste system. You can't intermarry, you can't interdine, you can't have right to property, you can't have right to specific occupation, you can't have right to education. And of course, there are so many restrictions on civics and political and cultural and religious right. Not to untouchable alone, but to women, which still continue. We know that. What is going in Maharashtra and elsewhere about the right. I came from Kerala. The Kerala government has not yet taken the position on whether there should be entry to the woman to a particular temple. So, the caste system is based on unfreedom. It put a lot of restriction on most of the rights that one should enjoy, most of the citizens' rights that you should enjoy. But the real denial comes for the Dalit and untouchables. That is that you don't have a right to property, you don't have a right to business, you don't have a right to decent employment except casual labor, you don't have a right to education, and of course you don't have a whole lot of civic, political and religious rights. You can't enter temple. So it is a system which takes away your freedom. And freedom is essential and necessary. Equality, fraternity, freedom, is necessary for your development, and it is precisely this freedom, and not only in social sphere and religious sphere, but most important is the economic sphere. Not to have a right to property. You may have a money to purchase land, but you don't have right to property. And in some area, in some way, it is an informal caste code. But in many cases, it was converted to a formal law. The classical example is in Punjab. In 1901, a law was passed that the land would be purchased only by Jat and not by Dalit. Even Brahmin were not allowed to purchase, because the principle was, the British interpret the principle that since occupation goes with the caste, and since Jat are the cultivators, they will have the right to the ownership, nobody else. In Punjab, the untouchable who entered into military and got some money, wanted to buy land, could not buy land. That is why, remember well, 90% of the scheduled castes are landless in Punjab. Maximum number of the proportion of the scheduled castes are in Punjab, 30%. Highest in the country of the total population of Punjab. And of that, 93% are landless, simply because from 1901 to 1947, they were not allowed to buy the land. It is Dr. Ambedkar, when he was the law minister, he passed that order, Punjab Land Alienation Act. So in many cases, in many states, we do not know. I asked one of the professor of history the other day that can you give me references on caste and medieval India? They say we'll get one or two. The neglect of caste and property right in medieval and colonial period is amazing. So there is an exclusion in academic also in terms of the issue that Dr. Jyotka has referred to. Coming back to the point is that the caste system, according to Dr. Ambedkar, is a system which is marked by unfreedom, restriction, and as a result, directly it leads to the underdevelopment of the persons. Let me elaborate on this, because I have done some work. There's huge work on the discrimination in social, cultural, religious sphere. But economic sphere, people thought that there is no discrimination in economic sphere. There is a discrimination in employment, there is a discrimination in purchase of land market, there is a discrimination in businesses. Of course, there is a discrimination in education institution of some type. Now, as a result of this restriction, it affects not only income distribution based on the caste line, but it also affects economic growth. Some of those who, you are student of economics, you know that the neoclassical economics is based, growth theory is based on the assumption that there is a factor mobility. That labor can move from one occupation to another occupation. Capital should move from a enterprise where there is a low profit to high profit. It is this mobility of capital and labor which brings the economic growth and lead to equilibrium. Here is a caste system where investment is not allowed from one occupation to another occupation, because there are restrictions on occupations. Employment restriction. You cannot take occupation, employment from occupation of one caste vis-a-vis the another caste. So the whole theories, economic theory of caste system brings out that the caste system, economics of caste system bring imperfection and immobility in the capital and labor and in undermine growth. I can give you an example. Who are the theorists of caste system, economic theories of caste system? They are Akraloff and Scholarly and Deepak Lal, who spent entire life in London, Cambridge. There is hardly any economists from India who try to economically theorize the caste system. That's also neglect of it. But if you take their finding is that the economics of caste system is dysfunctional and it will lead to an underdevelopment. Of course, it leads to a huge inequality in income distribution, but also it leads to high level of unemployment. How? The high caste would refuse to take the occupation of a low caste, and they will prefer to be voluntarily unemployed. You ask a Brahmin that you are unemployed, why can't you be a sweeper? Why can't you take a job of the cobbler? Nobody will take it. This is a voluntary unemployment. Now for untouchable, they want to take any occupation of any caste, but they are not allowed. So that's an involuntary unemployment. So 2012 and 11, at all India level, your unemployment is 6%. It is 10% for scheduled caste. So part of the unemployment is because of discrimination. There is a book now by Wani and many other, and Madheshwaran has studied how discrimination in employment and wages lead to high unemployment of scheduled caste. The point is that Ambedkar and Annihilation of Caste discuss this. Effect on employment, effect on efficiency and all that. So the analysis of Dr. Ambedkar lead him to believe that the degradation of the untouchable is primarily because of the caste system, but also then he relate to the larger issue. That if we want political democracy, if we want freedom, essentially by colonial freedom from colonialism means we are acquiring a freedom to rule ourselves. But here is a caste system which will come as an intermediary for a large majority of the population. 16% of scheduled caste, 8% of scheduled tribe, 27% of OBC, 3% of criminal and nomadic tribe. Such a massive section of Indian society is the victim of the caste system. So caste is not the issues of untouchable alone, obviously it is, but then he put this question to everybody. What about, you talk about nationalism, can we guarantee nationalism when caste exists? If nationalism means equal right to everybody, if nationalism means a common life and participatory life and socially inclusive life, does the caste promote that? So he raised these issues. Forget about untouchable, but he raised this issue for the larger development of the country. If caste undermine economic development, so how do we relate to our model of economic development? If our goal is to bring an economic or social equality, here is a caste which perpetuates inequality. So I think he brought the agenda of caste on a national scene and tell to everybody the ramification of it. Unfortunately, he was successful in many ways. I think Gandhiji responded and brought the issue of untouchability on national scene with difference of opinion, of course. But Gandhiji took the issue of untouchability, set up an papers, Harijan Sevak Sangha, started a weekly, Harijan Weekly, and made it a national issue. That is how the issue of untouchable came on national platform. The point I just want to summarize, because I think I come to the solutions, is that Dr. Ambedkar, through his analysis of the caste system and even Hindu really philosophical aspect of Hindu religion, several of them, theory of karma, theory of rebirth, which had a relation with the developmental aspect, I don't have a time to share with you, but he posed the problem of caste on a national scene, tell them the negative implication of it, and urge them to deal with it. That particularly in case of democracy, he said, unless you deal with the issue of caste, our democracy will be communal democracy, which still is continued to be. There is no problem about that. Ambedkar, after making a constitution, after being a law minister, contested twice, in 1952 in Bandara and 1954 in Bombay. A man who was given a D.Litt degree by Columbia University and considered one of the 6th most intelligent person of India, he was defeated twice. In Bombay, he was defeated by a cricketer, Badu cricketer. It was Dr. Ambedkar who felicitated him. As he was a Dalit and he was the first cricketer, so he felicitated him. It is he who, 20 years down the line, contested against Ambedkar, and Ambedkar lost against a cricketer. Same is the case in Bandara. So Ambedkar knew the communal base of democracy, and therefore he asked for political reservation for scheduled caste and for others. And we began to suffer from those issues. Women are asking for 32% reservation. They account 50% of the country's population. They are only 10% in legislature. Immense discrimination in political and electoral process. Muslim account 13-14% of the population. They are only 4% in the parliament. So therefore, Dr. Ambedkar, I don't have a time to talk to you about solution, but he developed the concept of representation and proportional representation in governance, through politics, through employment, through education and everywhere. And it is all because caste is an exclusionary phenomenon. It excludes the people, therefore you require a mechanism whereby you give equal share to everybody. Okay, let me come to last 10 minutes or so, we can have a discussion. Let me come to the solutions. The solutions, very briefly, that there are several memorandum and there are several write-up of Dr. Ambedkar, wherein he proposed solutions, and he got also in between. I mean, he got reservation as back as 1932. political reservation in 1932 in Pune Pact, but that Pune Pact has also a provision that effort will be made to have some sort of reservation in employment and education. When Ambedkar was a minister in British government, he made use of that clause, and the political employment reservation were introduced in 1943. There is a government order in 1943, and education reservation also at that time. So all the three reservations, legislation, education and employment, were done much before we adopt a constitution. Constitution only formalize it. Now, but when constitution framing was going on, Dr. Ambedkar wrote a memorandum to the Constitutional Assembly, and at that time he was the member of several committees. State and minority give the final last word and thinking of Ambedkar about the solution, not the analysis of the problem that he had done much earlier, but he came with a solution. And that is what I would like to discuss with him very, very briefly, that he identified two problems. One is the economic exploitation and poverty, and second, the social discrimination. And to deal with the problem of economic exploitation, he believed and very forcefully argued that the economy based on the private ownership of land and industry would not help. It will undermine the fundamental rights, it will undermine it will increase the miseries, and therefore, so to that extent he drew quite a lot from Marx as far as the economic solution is concerned, and he proposed what is called state socialism. That involved nationalization of land and equal distribution of land, because he has an utter contempt for the land reform. That land reform would not help the untouchable, and that is precisely what has happened. It is OBC who benefited from land reform, not the Dalit. Even today, 65% of Dalit household in rural India are wage laborer. They didn't get the land. There is a statistic available. So he said that there is no question that untouchable will benefit out of land. But for a generality of the poor, he says that let's nationalize the land, distribute it to everybody, and you can cultivate collectively, or otherwise you can also cultivate on a private basis. But the equality in land distribution should come through the state. Then he, of course, favored basic and key industry with the government, insurance, education and health with the government. Rest of the sector he left to the private sector. So he proposed a socialism of a kind in that report. But there is a difference here, and here there is a contribution of his in political thought. And then he wanted, he favored parliamentary democracy, of course, as one of the best form of governance. But he highlighted the contradiction between the parliamentary democracy and the economic inequality, and whether the poor will get the benefit in the parliament democracy. So on the one hand, he suggested the socialism of a type. On the other hand, he suggested parliamentary democracy. But he was quite sure that Western parliamentary democracy doesn't define the economic structure. The typical Western concept of political democracy is that you define fundamental right, you define the forms of the government, the executive and others, and leave the economic decision and other decision to the legislature, having a faith in them that they will take the right decision. But Ambedkar took a position here, political economic position, that insofar as most of the legislation will be governed by the economically better off section, there is no guarantee that they will take the decision in favor of the poor. They will take the decision in their own interests. And therefore he developed a concept which I believe was a very difficult concept, that is to make the socialism that he proposed, nationalization of land, basic and key industry, and all that responsibility of education, as a part of the constitution. And therefore he used the word what is called constitutional state socialism. It was not tried anywhere. He said that the Western democracy only defines political structure but doesn't define economic structure, and unless you have an egalitarian economic structure, you cannot have fundamental right and freedom to be enjoyed by the poor. And he said that the developing country should learn from the experience of the developed country, and also at the time of framing of the constitution define not only political structure but also economic structure. He tried, he couldn't succeed. when Nehru resolution came, you know that, you are familiar with Nehru committee. The Nehru resolution was that it was a committee which said that what should be the structure of the constitution, what should be the framework of the constitution, what should be the goal with which we should frame constitution. That is the Nehru committee, and it came for a discussion, first resolution. And it was Ambedkar who raised this issue. Because Nehru committee rightly pointed out that our goal should be economic equality, social equality, freedom, and others. And Ambedkar raised a very pertinent question, very sharp question to Nehruji. It is quoted there, if you look at the debate, that the goals are correct. And he said, I don't have any doubt about the sincerity of those who proposed this resolution. But where are the instruments? Where are the mechanisms through which you will achieve economic equality, social equality? And he said, means are lagging behind. But he stopped there and he said, let's go ahead. He knew that it will not be accepted. You imagine when he proposed the concept of socialism, it was Minu Masani, who was a socialist, he opposed that this Constitutional Assembly has not been given power to define economic structure. This Constitutional Assembly has been given power only to define and lay down the political structure. So Ambedkar did compromise. He did compromise on several occasion because he knew he had no strength whatsoever, political strength. It was a romance of destiny that he was made a chairman of the drafting committee, a boy who didn't have a right to education, who suffered discrimination. Ambedkar, when he got graduation, went to BA, he wanted to learn Sanskrit. He was refused to offer a Sanskrit. He took Persian. After completing education in Columbia and UK, he was left with 1 year period. He went to Bonn University in the Department of Indology to learn the Sanskrit. But he had to come back. So I think he did whatever he could do. So there are several compromises, a couple of compromises. He wanted separate electorate, he got reservation from Gandhiji because Gandhiji went too fast and to death. He wanted socialism, to which Congress did not favor. Even some of the socialists did not favor. And there are many other small issues. But the point that I am trying to arrive you, that freedom, the concept of freedom for Dr. Ambedkar was not only political freedom, economic freedom. And he said later on, I will come to the social discrimination, I'll end up by saying that, but he said that political democracy, the fiber and foundation of political democracy is economic equality and social equality. Stronger the fiber, stronger the political democracy. And he heavily criticized parliamentary political democracy by saying that political democracy talk only of equality in politics. One man, one value, one man, one vote. But it even doesn't do a nodding thing. It doesn't even touch and the problem of inequality. So inequality and political freedom coincide together. And that is why he has given his own explanation in how many countries democracy have collapsed simply because of immense economic inequality. Therefore, his concept of freedom was not only fundamental right, but his concept of freedom was to have an economic equality to make the political democracy successful. So this was his general program for everybody. It's not a program for untouchable. But the second remedy that he gave was a safeguard against discrimination. And that safeguard was that he was very, very clear that despite the fact, and that issue bothers us, and that's why I will underline this issue, despite the fact that the untouchable will have some access to land, some access to capital, some access to education, and some access to political right. Since in society discrimination persists under the influence of caste system, it will be difficult for them to enjoy those citizenship rights. And therefore you require a legal safeguard and other safeguard. He was very clear on that point, but there were not many with him. So he said that you require a safeguard against discrimination, and he proposed 3 measures. One was accepted, that everybody has equal civil right, but 7 was law against untouchability. Legal safeguard against untouchability, which was eventually read in 1955. In the Constitution, untouchability was banned. Second, safeguard against discrimination in employment and legislature and others, reservation brought in. If you cannot give a due inclusion, at least give them the share in proportion to the population, and that is why it was he proposed and it was accepted. But in Constitution, at the time of Constitution, there were some who opposed political reservation, who opposed reservation in employment. And I do not know, but some of them write that Ambedkar then threatened to resign as the chairman of drafting. Whenever I listened on the TV, one has to see the ignorance of those who speak that reservation is for 10 years, without knowing that political reservation limit is 10 years, every 10 years it is renewed. But there is no limit for employment and the education in the institutions. So finally, he got that safeguard against discrimination in the form of share in the employment, legislation, education. But there are two more. He was a very visionary person. He wanted safeguard against the administration because he thought that the bureaucracy is dominated by the Hindu caste, Hindus, and there is no guarantee that they would not discriminate. So he wanted some legal mechanism whereby the high caste bureaucracy will be made accountable. But that was not accepted. Now I understand that the Modified Atrocity Act, possibly there is some provision there I have not read. But the problem of discrimination by bureaucracy persists. There is no documentation, but you go to SC/ST Commission. About a couple of years ago, I asked the SC Commission, he said 12 to 13,000 cases by the government employees of discrimination. I want to safeguard against that. We have an example that all the party proposed promotion in reservation. It is Mulayam Singh Yadav who opposed, and it could be done. So he gave a formula of safeguard against discrimination by the legislature, by the executive. And what was that? So any decision related to scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, it must be approved by 2/3 of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe MPs. That safeguard is provided. But this was not also accepted, and therefore problems persist. So the Ambedkar therefore gave a double program. A program against economic exploitation to remove poverty for the generality of the poor irrespective of caste, religion, gender. But an additional program and a complementary program for the Dalit and Adivasi and a discriminated group, because economic mobility by itself will not guarantee that discrimination will stop. Because now we know that discrimination is neutral to your economic standing. Economic standing also is unable to overcome the discrimination. There are several countries in the world. I have done things. You take Northern Ireland, Catholic and Protestant, there is a huge fight between them and discrimination. And the Catholic, which are probably discriminated, are one of the most economically sound and educationally most advanced community in the world, and yet they face discrimination. Women, high caste or low caste women, face this gender discrimination. So Ambedkar knew that discrimination will persist despite the economic mobility, and therefore he suggested this program, a double program. And lastly, of course, he was worried about the Hindu ethos and Hindu cultures of inequality and other thing, and therefore he wanted that some secular element of culture which is egalitarian in nature, drawing from Buddhism and other, should be made as a part of our social life. Therefore he brought the concept of fraternity. Directive principle is the contribution of Ambedkar alone, which he borrowed from Ireland. Because some of those he wanted to bring in the constitution which he could not. So directive principle laid down equality of status, opportunity and facilities. And it laid down the direction to the government to frame laws and policy in a manner that it doesn't lead to concentration of wealth and income inequalities, and that we ensure equal status and equal opportunity. So that still has some protection. It is not enforceable in the court of law, but it has some protection. Well, friend, these are some of the thought which I absorbed as an economist, but I must say that his last lecture is quoted by everybody. Sitaram Yechuri quote quite often though, but everybody, that he warned the Indians that look, political democracy give one vote, one person. But the social democracy gives you one value, equal right. Economic democracy gives you access to economic opportunity. These challenges are still there, and those challenges are still there. One day somebody asked me, how come the leaders of the Ambedkar, contemporaries of Ambedkar are not remembered as much as Ambedkar is remembered? Thousands of statues. I said the point is they had a role which they performed, therefore that was a good thing. But Ambedkar predictions, Ambedkar engagement was with social democracy and economic democracy, which is still a problem. So he is often remembered. Thank you very much.